Hi and welcome to the Digital Accessibility Podcast sponsored by PCR Digital, who provide people-centric recruitment. Throughout this series, I'll be interviewing professionals who work within the field of accessibility to share their expertise, journeys and general thoughts on the key issues facing the industry today. My aim is to provide an in-depth look into the world of digital accessibility and the impact it has on everyone. The goal is to bridge the skills gap in the current market and inspire other people to join the movement towards a more accessible digital world. So whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out, I hope that this platform will provide you with valuable insights and practical advice from experts and advocates within this extremely important community. So sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy the chat. Joining me today is Grant Broome, who is the founder and digital accessibility strategy manager at Dig Inclusion. Dig Inclusion is a small company dedicated to making digital media totally inclusive. They provide testing and training to ensure that your services are accessible to everyone, regardless of ability. Grant was also Web Accessibility Manager for CDSM Interactive Solutions, now known as Thinky. Grant is someone who has dedicated their career to digital accessibility and inclusion. With over 20 years of experience in the space, he has invaluable hands-on experience, and we're hoping to tap into that today. So welcome to the podcast, Grant.
Thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
No problem at all. So next 20 years working within the field of accessibility, designing more inclusive websites and tools. Many conversations that I have include a part about how there's still so much to do. But to try and make it more positive, I'm sure that there must have been so much progress within that time, surely.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The landscape has changed an awful lot in 20 years. When you think about the developments in technology, specifically mobile devices arriving, richer content, and high bandwidth means much more video and other interaction. And AI has just landed, so it's hard to know where to begin. But I think the most significant change is probably awareness of accessibility. So moving on in 20 years, back when I started in accessibility, you had to explain what it was, let alone get people to try and uh, introduce inclusive practices, or even think about having something like an audit. And that's changed. So now with legislation and just an increased awareness of disability and inclusion, people know what accessibility is now. I think the next challenge is really to help people to implement it and understand it, and start moving towards producing more accessible content, which is the main challenge. But yeah, certainly in 20 years, things have progressed a lot. There's been a lot of change, and there's been a lot of positive move towards making more inclusive content, which is obviously a good thing.
Definitely. It's great to know that that awareness is constantly being raised, and obviously you've had a big part to do. You've had a big part in that, and I think that the landscape in general is growing, isn't it? I think we're seeing an awful lot more. I say a lot on this podcast. Is it because I'm talking about it more and talking to those people? But I think in general, we're starting to see more accessible or more diverse advertisements, even on TV, that are including people that are maybe hard of hearing or deaf or blind people or people with disabilities sort of in programs and stuff. So even that awareness, I think, and representation really starts to help as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, it's been represented in a much more positive way now as well. So I think historically people have been a little bit afraid of disability, or unsure about how to speak to people with disabilities. And I think exposure has been quite low, but I think that has changed, and the media representation of disability has changed dramatically as well in that time, and that's just all very helpful.
Definitely brilliant. And also, what's equally or even more so helpful is what you do with Dig Inclusion. So could you go into a bit more detail about what it is that Dig Inclusion does and what your plans are for the near future? And also, so there's a few questions here. Maybe share one of your biggest achievements since founding that company. Yeah, a proud moment for you would be nice to hear about.
Okay, so Dig Inclusion helps companies understand and deliver accessible content. So we do this through audits and consultancy and training. We also fix PDFs and make them accessible, which is one of those kind of hidden areas of accessibility which people often don't think about. So very often you'll get a perfectly accessible journey on the web, and that will end with an inaccessible PDF. So that's one of the services that we offer, and something that people probably don't think about enough. So we've got a team of testers who have deep knowledge of accessibility requirements and how to check content to make sure that they meet those requirements. I think one of the biggest issues that design and development teams have is just understanding the issues that their content has. Well, not just understanding the issues that the content has, but how to fix it as well. So we spend a lot of time with our clients, helping them understand what these issues are, how they impact on people, and how to fix those issues as well, which is, the important key. Having the technical knowledge to be able to do that is quite important. Back in January, Dig was acquired by Nile Group based in Edinburgh, and they're a really great company. And they've helped us tighten up our proposition and offer better services to customers. And in the near future, we'll be getting better visibility on our brand. I think we've always offered really good, I would like to say best in class accessibility services, but we haven't really had the time or to spend on marketing what we actually do. So that'll be changing in the coming months. We'll also be dipping our toes into AI and finding out whether it's really useful for accessibility testing yet. So there are other services out there that say that they use AI, but they're not particularly impressive right now. And I'd like to explore whether some of the other approaches for using AI can help our testing teams with speed more than anything, because accessibility testing is it's a lot of heavy lifting. It's quite laborious, and I mean, just in the labor sense. And if we can develop tools that can help us with it, that's going to be great. I think probably one of the biggest achievements of Dig, it's probably not one thing, but I think that for a company that was bootstrapped, we got a really impressive client list across finance and sports, retail, and charity sector as well. And I'm really proud that it's grown from very humble beginnings with no investment, and it's grown to a company that's servicing some very impressive clients. So I think that's probably the thing that I'm most proud of, and our Hugr tool, which hopefully we'll get to talk about as well.
Definitely be asking about that in a little bit. And I think so from our conversation when we met at Accessibility Scotland last month now, we mentioned about the recruitment in the space, and unfortunately there was one of the candidates that I've placed elsewhere had been trained and was currently working with yourself. So it was an unfortunate instance where I kind of poached someone from you, but I'd say an achievement of Dig is that you do offer that outstanding training. You make some of the, some people with limited knowledge, I suppose, in the accessibility field, you provide them with huge amounts of knowledge, and then they can provide that best in service level across the board. So even beyond Dig, that's a huge achievement to know that some of those people that you've imparted that knowledge on them and assisted them to grow in their own personal journeys as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's always painful when you've got someone like a key member of staff leave. but at the same, at the same time, I don't think we can talk about where they went to, but it's
Mm,
very proud that we've managed to train people to the level where they can go and work for some of the top companies in the world. And I suppose it's a bittersweet moment in that sense. It's like I don't know, when you nurture someone and they just become excellent, and then they go on to do other things. I think that's it's also a proud moment, as painful as it is.
of
At the
course.
time, it's good to know that they're valued in that way, and to their own credit as well. When people work hard in this industry, I think that plenty of doors can open. There's so much that needs to be done in accessibility, and it's probably one of the most probably one of the fastest growing areas at the moment, because so many companies are behind on accessibility, and they probably don't even understand the need for recruitment. So the ones that do, they find the gems, and I'm really pleased that some of the people that we've um, trained up in Dig have gone on to do to join those great companies.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And it is a shame because I mean we're a very small company ourselves, so it's really tricky that there is that competitive market where you
Mm.
could lose people to other larger companies that can offer certain things that we might not be able to offer. And it's it's an unfortunate thing, but like you say, if we can see that the sort of bittersweet, but more the sweet side that they're out there doing the good work, then that's brilliant. And they're still carrying the torch, the dig inclusion torch, where they learned what they know. But brilliant. And then so we again mentioned that we met at Accessibility Scotland in September. Really nice to meet you face to face and catch up. So I know that we've had a few sort of discussions online, but it's there's something different about meeting in person.
Mhm.
And you mentioned then that you've developed a tool to assist with some more automation of accessibility testing, and that's going to help so many people, like you just mentioned about how laborious it can be conducting those sort of content and the tests of content and tools. Could you go into any more detail about that tool and how that might help?
I would love to. So one of the things about accessibility testing is that it can be very repetitive. It's just the nature of that type of testing. Probably most types of testing digital products is you'll find an amount of repetition. So we developed Hugr to reduce that or eliminate it in some circumstances. So the tool we've been developing is called Hugr. We developed it as an in-house tool or framework for our own accessibility testing, because I think we just got tired of Excel spreadsheets and Word documents and reporting in that way. And I know that there are other methods of reporting, such as through Jira, and there are other accessibility frameworks out there as well. But we felt that we just needed to have something that suited the way that we tested. And also to keep everything in one place and simplify the testing process and make it consistent. So the database behind Hugr contains hundreds of pre-written issues that can be found in an instant, and every one of those has a corresponding solution, and it's a guided process as well. So I'm kind of jumping around with ideas, I suppose, or concepts of it, but essentially a person who is using Hugr, even if they're a rookie, even if they're not that experienced, they'll they'll be presented with a spreadsheet. They'll be able to an online spreadsheet through a browser that will have columns and rows representing the different guidelines and the different types of content they want to test. And then it's a guided process through testing. And the aim is to populate, everything in the spreadsheet. But what's happening is that as people are adding issues to the spreadsheet, as they add in screenshots, etc., a report is getting written in the background. So by the time you finish, just log in all the data that you have. The report's written for you at the end. But it makes the amount of writing and the amount of repetition um, I won't say disappear, but it minimizes it, and it removes the need for a lot of it. So it just means that we can get through testing much faster than we would using traditional methods. And for our customers, it's very easy for them to look at the report. They can log in online. They can comment on the issues that we've raised. They can ask for more information, etc. So it's a very it's a slick way of doing accessibility testing, and it's free as well. So we do have enterprise versions and team versions, but there's also a free version that people can go along and try out. It's hugr.app, so that's hugr.app. And it's not an app you'd use on your phone. It is actually something that you'd use on your desktop through a browser, and it'll rapidly you can go through accessibility testing really rapidly and speed up the process using that. So I urge anyone to give it a go and see what they think about it, and let me know, if what they think of it as well. And if there's anything that we can do to improve it, we will be all ears.
That sounds fascinating. Sounds amazing. So I'm even going to go and do that now with our website because, like you said, it's a guided process. I mean, obviously, I know a fair amount about accessibility, but on the less practical side. So, and what I'm trying to do is more courses and get more practical knowledge for myself as well, just to better serve clients. But if something like that, if you said it's more or less a guided process, if you know what you're looking for, sort of thing, could it
Yeah,
help to train people?
yeah, it can. So there's guidance built into it. So with every criteria that you're testing against, say 1.1.1, which is non alternatives for non-text content, or basically alternative text for images. That's what really boils down to. There's guidance in there that is written in a very readable format. So one thing about the guidelines that we have, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, they are quite technical. I think you'd probably need to be a developer to understand them all properly. So what we've done is we've taken that information and we've just made it easy to read and understand, and also simplified the test process for the different criteria. So I think that probably anybody with the basic knowledge of HTML should be able to just open up Hugr, start testing, and get really good results from it.
Brilliant, perfect. And you've said a key point there as well that I'm just going to circle back to very quickly, about the WCAG guidelines and how they're written in quite technical speak or technical jargon, which in itself you could say, I don't want to say anything against the W3C, they do great work and the guidelines are
Yeah,
very helpful,
100%.
but in itself could make those guidelines inaccessible to people that struggle to read technical jargon. So that's great that you've got a tool like that that's going to put it in more layman's terms, I suppose, or something that's, like you say, more readable, a wider audience, then in turn making digital accessibility, or the provision of digital accessibility, more accessible. More people can get into the profession, which I think is the end goal for this podcast anyway. But in general, I think if we need more support globally, people focusing on and working in the space. So it's brilliant, and definitely going to reiterate, go to hugr.app, hugr.app, give it a go. I'll put links obviously in the description for this episode, and I'm sure that people will be able to get in touch with you directly, Grant, with any feedback and tips.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent, great stuff. So during your time in the accessibility space, you must have seen just how restricted and niche the field can be, as we've just mentioned. But has there always been that skills gap? Is it because it's so niche, and is that one of the reasons that DIG was founded? And would you say that there are less roles available? It seems that there's a need for specialists to come into multiple companies in a system, so you need more of a consultancy framework rather than an in-house team. Like, is that why DIG was created, to make it more of a consultancy?
Yeah. So yeah, I think most companies, even very large companies, don't have an accessibility team in-house. So most companies at the moment, at least, will be looking to third parties to fulfill those needs. There's a huge skills gap in accessibility at the moment. I think the accessibility lead role is growing, and more companies are investing in full-time accessibility leads. But that doesn't mean that those leads can then do the testing as well. That's not really their role. Their role is to manage the output of the company, make sure that the company understands how to create accessible content, also do the testing, well, manage the testing. They shouldn't really be doing testing themselves, although I think a lot of them do get involved in testing because it's very difficult to not to be drawn into that. And it's a very tough role, with lots of people in this role suffering burnout, actually. And I think that's because they just need more support, or they need more need to be able to shift the load a little bit more. I think the main reason is that it's so isolated. So if you work for a company like Dig Inclusion, most of those around you have a similar knowledge, excuse me, and you can share the load more easily. But even then, it's tough because all roads will lead to you. And if you're an accessibility lead in an organization, you often find that you're the only one with anything close to a complete knowledge of the subject, and you'll be bombarded with information requests, support, training, and other day-to-day managerial tasks. And it's easy to become overwhelmed, and we see that happening a lot. So, in Accessibility Scotland, there were a couple of speakers there that mentioned it, or even had it on the slides, and I've seen a few slides recently. And I think the root of that is just because the accessibility is hard. It is quite tough. And when the approach that we take at in Dig Inclusion to get people up to speed, we often work with people who don't have any accessibility experience, but of course we need to get their knowledge up as soon as possible, so that the leadership roles aren't diving in and kind of doing the testing themselves. The approach we take at Dig, when we're trying to get people up to speed, when we take on new employees, I call them employees, but really they're consultants in their own right, really. They've got a lot of skills and a very deep knowledge. But we tend to take people who maybe have very little experience, but they've got the right aptitude, and we've identified that they're going to be a fast learner, or at least we hope that they will, because there's a lot of learning to do. And it's a process that takes about 6 months, but they'll shadow an experienced tester or senior tester. They'll do a testing alongside them. They'll have some of the simpler criteria to test, and we'll just build up their knowledge over time. And then at around 6 months, we'll let them have their own projects and monitor the outcomes of those through our QA process. So it's quite a long process. There's a lot of investment, I suppose, in time. But what it means is that it's not a case of you put someone on a training course and then suddenly they're an accessibility expert. It's their knowledge is born out of doing the test along someone who's very, very experienced in testing, and then we'll find that they'll just be very, very capable of doing the tests themselves. And that's the approach we take, and that's how we create so many great I can't say that we create great people, but that's how we foster, or that's how we nurture. That's the right word. So that's how we nurture people's skill set and accessibility, and it seems to work really well.
It's a lovely framework to have, and I think it's that imparting knowledge and giving people practical experience or practical knowledge, because we know there are a lot of certifications you can get out there. There's a lot of courses you can take, like the ones I've done myself, and it's not necessarily going to give you that mindset. It's not going to give you the understanding of the user requirements and how different they can be, and if you do something one way. Recently had a chat with Sean Connor, who's the head of accessibility at Monzo Bank, and he was saying that it is that mindset and trying to get into what are the user requirements, and if I'm going to develop or design something this way, who might I exclude? And not many people think that simple thing initially,
Mm.
which would help if a lot of people ask that question early on in the design phase. Then it may make things a little bit better. But yeah, no, it's an amazing framework to have, and you like you said, I think you are not nurturing and fostering new talent and putting them into the marketplace, which is always brilliant. Um,
And it
so
feels good.
perfect. Good, brilliant, very rewarding, definitely. So for the listeners, for people that might be interested in working with the consultancy such as Dig Inclusion, could you give us an idea of what the benefits are of working with a consultancy? I guess you've kind of touched on that, because a lot of companies they'll probably put a lead in place and say, that's our budget, we've invested in accessibility, they manage everything top to bottom. But I guess what would it usually be with it? Is it a longer term partnership with the clients you bring on board?
Yeah, it has to be longer term. So as we've already discussed, like the learning for a trainee who's with us takes at least 6 months. So for a whole company to kind of gain that knowledge internally and change the culture, it takes longer. So we do sometimes just do an audit for companies because that's their budget. But the ones that have the greatest success are the ones that we have a more long-term relationship with. Companies normally have very large gaps in their accessibility knowledge and capability that they're blissfully unaware of. They're creating huge amounts of inaccessible content, and that puts them at risk of losing customers. And not so much here in the UK at the moment, although it will change. But in the US, we see a lot of punitive legal um, action against companies that don't produce accessible content. And I think we are going to see that happening here as well in the UK. And there's new laws coming out across the EU that mean that everybody has to have accessible content. And I think companies are still catching up on that. But it's such a complex topic, and I think most people are under the impression that somebody in the company is taking care of it, that they've got a handle of it. Usually the accessibility lead, but of course they can't do all of it. And the reality is that teams are working flat out to meet the deadline, and accessibility is one of the last things that they dedicate sufficient time to, and one of the first things to fall by the wayside. And that's because accessibility is so complicated. There are so many requirements for so many different user types. The guidance is very technical, as we've discussed, and therefore it's easy to misinterpret it if you don't have a technical background. And that's one of the difficult things with accessibility. Is a lot of people, they're not technical. They're in accessibility because they care about people, or they're designers, and because of the technical nature of WCAG for a lot of it, it's very difficult for them to get into. So the benefit of working with Dig Inclusion or any other consultancy like us is that we're here to help you navigate a very rocky landscape. I remember hearing someone say that accessibility isn't rocket science. And I'd argue that in many ways it's more difficult than rocket science. At least when you build in a rocket, everyone has the same outcome in mind. The accessibility company is here to make sure your rocket doesn't blow up on the launch pad, especially in light of those new regulations that I just mentioned. And it can be very, very challenging. So we need to, our role as a company is just to help people understand what accessibility is, what the outcomes are for accessibility, test for accessibility. There's a lot of facets to it that we just need to have in place to make sure that those companies understand where they're going, and it takes time. So those longer term relationships that we have with clients are the ones where we see the best results.
Definitely, yeah, and I love that. That's probably going to be featured in an upcoming episode. Is a quote from Grant Broome that accessibility is actually more difficult than rocket science. I'd love to see people refute that. I think
Rocket
it's a
scientists.
great. Well, yeah, we'll see if Elon Musk listens to the podcast. That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so do you have an idea of what you think are the most immediate challenges facing digital accessibility, like say the next year? And you've mentioned the new regulations across the EU that are coming in 2025, I believe. Are they having an impact already on companies' appetites for accessibility, or are we still seeing that blissful ignorance or unawares amongst the sort of the business community?
Um, so tackle that last one first. I think that I think the regulations will have an impact, but they'll probably be retrospective once they've come out. So what we saw with the public sector bodies accessibility regulations, which came out in 2018, is that the adoption was very slow. So even though the regulations came into force, within a couple of years, the the websites weren't accessible. So what we're seeing now is a lot of reactionary inquiries, so that we've got lots of public sector organizations getting in touch with us and saying, no, we failed the test, or this sort of thing. And it's because I don't want to say that they didn't take the regulations seriously. It's probably more the case that they just didn't know what to do. They
Yeah,
didn't know how to tackle them, and they had no guidance, and they wouldn't have had an accessibility lead. So they just didn't have the things in place that they needed to, and didn't know how to get them, probably. Although there was plenty of guidance from the government themselves, I think that people got a little bit lost with it. So I think we'll probably see the same thing with the private sector regulations coming out of the EU. Of course, in the UK, we may or may not have regulations. I think we probably will have regulations that match.
yeah,
But in any case, the companies in the UK probably won't want to fall behind their EU counterparts when that kicks in. So so I think that it will make a change, but I think it'll probably lag a little bit behind the regulation. And whether we'll start to see legal cases like we do in the States over this is yet to be seen. But I think it's likely. I think it's much more likely. I've been saying for years, in the next couple of years, we're going to see some UK case law on this, but it's very slow to materialize. But I think it will come. It's quite powerful, the legislation that's already there, and for that to be bolstered by new legislation, and for that to be brought sharply in focus to the public, I think we are going to see the landscape change again. So to the first part, I think the digital space is constantly growing and evolving, and accelerating, actually, especially with recent developments in AI and VR as well. And they're going to be probably the biggest causes of change, and things that we don't have lots of guidance on now. We could definitely do with some VR accessibility guidelines ahead of mass adoption. And AI interfaces are probably going to move past keyboard and screens very quickly. And just like other industries, I don't think we have the right tools to adapt yet. And we may see a lot of emerging technologies that don't have accessibility built in. I know there's a lot of cynics that believe that large-scale AI adoption is still quite a way off, and VR experiences will never catch on, and perhaps they're right. But I have reservations. I think there's a clear direction emerging, and some of our current technologies, such as keyboards, are already starting to feel dated now, I think, if we really think about it. I mean, they've been around for a long time, and speech is something that we're starting to use more and more with devices, and I think we all want to be able to speak to other devices more, but they're just not very good at responding right now. But I think that's going to change really quickly, and something's going to give, and I think it'll happen much faster than people expect.
I think that's a really, really poignant point. And even just in my own my own life, you know, I've got a microphone button on my TV remote. Who would have thought, you know? And now I'm teaching my grandparents, like, oh, if you just press that and speak to it, it will come up. You know,
Yeah.
just say Netflix or whatever streaming platform you want to use, and it will just it sort of takes that on. But then you instantly now, because of being in this space, I'm thinking, well, what if people don't have the ability to use that speech recognition technology? They're going to still need an element of the manual process. And is that fair? Is there something else we could do? So it's, yeah, it's that constant emerging technology that's going to keep everyone on their toes. And it's the sort of perpetual need for people like yourself, for consultancies like Dig, and others. And it's just, yeah, it's I think making people aware that it's here to stay. We need to constantly and continuously think about accessibility, especially in this sort of tech world we're living in, eh? But sorry, do you want to add anything to that at all?
No,
Or
no, no, no. I was just agreeing with you. It's there's a lot of change. It's going to happen very quickly, and I think we need to be more ready for it than we are. Really.
absolutely. But yes, I mean, this might help then. So the final question I usually ask every guest on the podcast is, what's the simplest, most cost effective and convenient way that someone can implement digital accessibility within any line of work?
Yeah. So, accessibility is complicated and it's time consuming. So it's hard to come up with something that's just a simple solution. But I would say that you need to invest a tiny amount of time finding out what you don't know, just to give you an idea of the scope of it. Because I think a lot of people are mistaken in thinking that accessibility is very easy to deliver. I think that very often we get accessibility, we're asked to do an audit right at the end of the process, where there's no time to fix any of the things that we find, or do a retest, or maybe iterations of retest. And we've had maybe no input into the design either. So a product in that's a very precarious position for a product to be in. And I think that's just born out of just lack of awareness, lack of knowledge. So I would say invest a tiny amount of time finding out what you don't know. Spend maybe an hour looking at WCAG 2.2, which comes out today. I
Yeah,
know that this podcast will be later, but this is the day we record in. Just so you have an idea of the scale of the accessibility requirements, and start having conversations with colleagues, so that you can begin to foster an inclusive culture. Talk to an accessibility agency, maybe ask for a meeting, 30 minutes of the time, so you can talk about your current situation. And I think most agencies will be glad to do this. And the whole aim of this would be just to find out what you don't know. Don't be ignorant about how big the scope of accessibility is, the task ahead of you to make things accessible. I think that's where the problems arise, is when people just have no knowledge of it. And that's what we see day in, day out with companies that just haven't given it enough time or attention, because they didn't realize how complicated or how important it was. But as a quick tip, you can download an accessibility checker. It won't tell you the whole story, but if you find errors, then you'll need to do something about them. So if you were to download something like the Wave toolbar for Chrome, accessibility check, and just run it over there, that'll give you a number of errors, and you're going to have to do something about those errors, because those errors mean that somebody isn't going to be able to access your website, and for lots of different reasons. You don't want that. So yeah, that's what I would say. Just try and find out what you don't know. And I don't mean learn everything that you don't know, just appreciate the scope of how big this subject is. And you could do that just by looking at the guidelines, or just running an accessibility check, and that will give you an idea.
brilliant. That's an amazing tip. And like you say, it's having the humility to understand, to realize, I don't think we talk it. it's quite a tricky topic, I think, to talk about, because it sounds like we're bashing on people and being like, why don't you know this? Why don't you do this? But actually, there are people out there that know this stuff, and you just need to ask the question, have the humility to be like, well, it's not something I focus on, but I do care, and I want to make sure that everyone can use our service or website or tool or whatever it might be. And yeah, brilliant advice. And that's a nice simple thing someone can do to take those first steps. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
The final thoughts then. So I usually just sort of say that's the end of the sort of formal question. So thank you very much. But I just wanted to give you some time to share anything of real importance to you at the moment, either within the accessibility world or personal life, or anything you'd like to add.
So I think, one thing that I think as a general thing, I think people need to, especially in today's world where people are really anxious about things, and there seems to be a lot of concern about, well, a lot of people are struggling with their mental health and things like that. And we talked a little bit about burnout as well, which is, definitely a danger in our industry, and something that, I've grappled with as well. And I think, what I'd like to say is just be kind to yourself, and remember you're human, and you'll make mistakes, but just be authentic, be honest with yourself and others, and also invest in the people that care about you. And it's easy in the world we live in today to get distracted by, a job or media or things that are happening abroad, or just big issues. A lot of people are worried about things like AI and the economy. But I think, what we should really be focusing on is investing in the people we care about and the people that care about us. And also invest in ourselves as well, building up knowledge, making ourselves more valuable, mastering something, whether it be in work or outside work. Mastering something is quite a valuable thing to do. And also to be brave as well. I think a lot of people get stuck in situations that they're not happy with, and I think, to be brave, to find ways of getting out of those situations is really important too. So I think, yeah, not much on accessibility there, but I think these are things that I've been thinking about quite a lot lately, and I think they're things that have helped me just to focus on those things.
Thank you so much, Grant. It's a lovely thing to add. And like I say, I'm hoping to get this episode sort of edited and ready for release in the next couple of weeks. But Mental Health Awareness Day, I believe, is the 10th of October. So that would be either just finished or on the day. So when this comes out, so
Yeah,
it's an amazing thing to add. And I usually finish each episode on a quote centered around accessibility to sort of promote that. But I think you've just done it yourself. I think what you've said there is just as apt, and I needn't say any more. But I appreciate that you sent me some notes before the episode, so I'm just going to sort of paraphrase and repeat that for the quote, if that's okay, Grant. So
yeah,
to be kind to yourself, remember that you're human and you'll make mistakes, be authentic, invest in the people that you care about and that care about you, invest in yourself, and to be brave. I think that's just what a better way to finish the episode. So there you go. I was going to quote you in a future episode, but I've done it in your own. So there you go.
Oh, that's great. Joe, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I've really enjoyed talking about accessibility with you, and maybe we'll do it again sometime.
I hope so, definitely. I'm hoping to do some sort of panel episodes in the future as well. So it'd be great to sort of get some minds together to sort of approach some subjects within the accessibility space. So I'd love to have you on an episode like that. And I hope it won't turn into a debate, but more of a discussion.
I can't guarantee that.
Well, there we go. But thank you so much for joining me on the episode, Grant, and for all the incredible work that you're doing within the accessibility and inclusive design space. I hope that you've enjoyed the chat. I've really enjoyed it, and yeah, like I say, we'll stay in touch. I'll share the links to Hugr, so Hugr.app, Dig Inclusion, Nile, and everything else. So they'll be available in either the descriptions of the episode or alongside the posts for it. But brilliant, thank you so much, Grant, and look forward to staying in touch moving forward.
Okay, it's been my pleasure. Thanks very much, Joe.